The termination notice had been printed on hospital letterhead, which Sophia thought was a particular kind of cruelty, the institution's logo at the top, clean and authoritative, lending weight to something that should have been shameful to produce. She folded it once and put it in the front pocket of her pink backpack. The backpack was the one bright thing she allowed herself, dusty rose with brass zippers, a gift from her mother 3 Christmases ago, wildly impractical for a trauma nurse and absolutely irreplaceable. She had taken it to every shift since. She would not leave it behind now just because Graves wanted her to feel small on her way out the door. She was clearing her locker when he appeared in the doorway. Graves didn't enter. He leaned against the frame with the comfort of a man in his own home, watching her pack with an expression that managed to be simultaneously bored and satisfied, the expression of someone who had wanted something for a long time and was now watching it arrive. "For what it's worth," he said, "you had potential. Early on." Sophia placed her stethoscope in the bag. The one she had bought herself, the good one, because the hospital-issue equipment was never calibrated correctly and she had stopped trusting imprecision years ago. "The Bay 3 patient's chart," she said, without turning around. "The one with the interaction flag. You're going to want to make sure that documentation stays intact." "Is that a threat, Collins?" "It's a fact." She zipped the backpack. "I documented everything. I always do." She turned. She looked at him, really looked, the way she rarely allowed herself to because looking directly at certain people for too long was a kind of contamination. She saw what she had always seen and spent 3 years professionally ignoring. A man who had confused the silence of people beneath him for agreement, and had built his entire identity on that confusion. "You didn't fire me because of Bay 3, she said quietly. "You fired me because I was right in front of witnesses and you needed to do it before I became a problem you couldn't manage." Graves said nothing. Which was, itself, an answer. Sophia walked past him into the corridor. She did not look back. She moved through the ER the way she always moved, measured, aware, cataloging, past the nurse's station where 3 of her colleagues watched from behind their monitors with the careful non-expression of people who were sorry but not sorry enough, past the resident's alcove, past the bay where her last patient had coded and survived and been credited to someone else's file. She pushed through the ambulance bay doors into the cold. The night air hit her face and she stood still for exactly 4 seconds, which was the amount of time she had learned to allow herself before continuing. Then the doors behind her exploded open. Not her doors. The main bay entrance, 30 feet to her left, a set of reinforced double doors that were rated for gurneys and emergencies and which 3 men in blood-soaked suits had just blown through with the momentum of people who did not acknowledge the existence of obstacles. They were moving fast. Too fast for the situation to be anything other than critical. The man at the center of the formation, tall, coiled, his white shirt destroyed, a neck tattoo disappearing into the ruin of his collar, was moving under his own power but barely, one arm across the shoulder of the man beside him, the other pressed hard against his own ribs. The ER swallowed them. Sophia stood in the cold for 1 more second. Then she followed. Inside, the bay had already fractured into the particular chaos that happened when clinical training met genuine terror and terror won. Graves was there, someone had called him back, or he had never left, and he was doing the thing he did under real pressure, which was perform competence loudly while the competence itself failed to materialize. "Get him on the table. Someone get me a pressure reading. Who authorized, does anyone know who this is? I need security." Hanol Jang was not cooperating. He was on his feet beside the gurney, refusing to lie down, one hand gripping the rail with white-knuckled ferocity while his lead bodyguard attempted to communicate something urgent in rapid Korean that Graves was responding to in louder and louder English, as though volume was a translation strategy. Hanol's eyes were moving. Not randomly, systematically. He was scanning every face in the room with the focused, deteriorating intensity of a man whose body was failing faster than his mind was willing to accept. His oxygen saturation, visible on the portable monitor someone had managed to clip to his finger, read 79. He was looking for something. Sophia stepped into the bay. His eyes stopped. The bodyguard saw it first, saw his employer's gaze lock across the room, and turned. His hand moved instinctively toward his jacket. Her, Hanol said. The word came out rough, stripped down, essential. He pointed directly at Sophia. Bring her here. Graves turned. His expression moved through several stages quickly, settling on something ugly. Collins, you are not authorized to be in this. But Sophia was already walking forward, because she had seen the monitor and she had seen the wound and she had seen this particular configuration of damage before in a context she did not discuss at work. She stopped beside Hanol. He was shaking now, the controlled facade fracturing under blood loss and pain, and whatever adrenaline had carried him through the doors now beginning to metabolize. She leaned close. She said 4 words. Quietly. In Korean. A phrase structured less like language and more like a frequency, specific, calibrated, meant for exactly one person. Hanol Jang went still. Not calm the way sedation was calm. Still the way a person became still when something they had been bracing against simply stopped pressing. His shoulders dropped 2 inches. His grip on the rail loosened. He exhaled, long and slow, and lay back against the gurney with the deliberate trust of a man who had decided, against considerable evidence and instinct, that this particular person was safe. The room watched in a silence so complete that the monitor's beeping felt intrusive. Graves stared. His mouth opened. He looked at the bodyguard, who was watching Sophia with an expression that had rearranged itself from threat into something approaching awe. What did she say? Graves demanded. Nobody answered him. Sophia was already gloved, already working, already 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room, which was exactly where she had always been, and exactly what had always made Elliot Graves so very, very afraid of her. She called for the chest tray. She called for type and cross. She called for a second line, left AC. And then, without looking up from her patient, she said, "Someone tell Dr. Graves he can scrub in when he's ready. We'll be going to the OR in 6 minutes." Graves heard it. Everyone heard it. The redistribution of authority, delivered without drama, as a clinical fact. He scrubbed in. The ore was cold and bright and smelled like iodine and the particular antiseptic that Sophia associated with the boundary between survival and its alternative. Hanol was under general anesthesia now, his chest open to the work, the room running with the efficient rhythm of a team that had remembered, under pressure, what they were actually for. Sophia was circulating, moving supplies, tracking vitals, maintaining the environment, when she noticed Graves' hands pause over the field. Just for a moment. Just long enough. She watched him reach for the medication tray. She watched him select a vial. She watched his eyes move, briefly, deliberately, to the anesthesiologist's back. She crossed the room in 4 steps and took the vial from his hand. Quietly. No accusation. Just removal. She looked at the label. She looked at Hanol's chart on the board behind her, where his documented allergy, one specific drug family, flagged in red at intake, was clearly visible to anyone who had chosen to read it. She set the vial aside. She selected the correct alternative and placed it on the tray. Then she looked at Graves. He looked back at her. And in the look was everything that the termination notice had been trying to accomplish and hadn't, the full weight of what he had intended, and the full weight of her refusal to become its consequence. "Surgeons ready," Sophia said to the room, her voice even. "Let's keep moving. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going." Graves moved fast, for a man who had spent 20 years letting other people absorb the consequences of his decisions. Within 4 minutes of Sophia removing the vial, he had constructed the narrative. She watched it happen in real time, the quiet word to the scrub tech, the careful repositioning of the medication tray, the way he called the anesthesiologist over with the specific tone of someone raising a concern rather than manufacturing one. When the charge nurse appeared at your door, Graves was already pointing at Sophia with the controlled gravity of a man reporting a safety incident. She interfered with the medication protocol, he said. Substituted a drug without authorization. I need that documented before we go any further. The charge nurse looked at Sophia. Sophia looked at the vial she had set aside, which was now back on the tray, moved, she noted, while her attention had been on Graves. She understood then, completely and without surprise, the full architecture of what he had built and how long he had been building it. The patient's allergy flag, Sophia said, to no one in particular and everyone present, is on the board. Red. Top line. It's been there since intake. The anesthesiologist turned to look at the board. The silence that followed had texture. Graves filled it immediately. This is exactly the pattern of behavior that led to the termination notice. Insubordination dressed as clinical judgment. I want her removed from this or. Nobody moved. Not because they were on her side. Because Hanol Jang's oxygen saturation had just dropped to 71, and the monitor was making a sound that ended arguments faster than any of them could. The flat line came at 2:14 a.m. Clean. Absolute. A single sustained tone that flattened the room's energy the way a wave flattens sand, suddenly, completely, leaving nothing of the previous shape behind. Graves called the time. Twice. The second time louder, as though volume would make it more official, more final, more the kind of thing that closed a file and released a room full of people back to their ordinary lives. He stepped back from the table. The resident stepped back. The scrub tech began reaching for the draping protocol. The anesthesiologist was already documenting. The OR, which seconds ago had been the most important room in the building, was beginning the quiet bureaucratic process of becoming a room where something had simply not worked out. Time of death, 2:14, Graves said, and he said it with a steadiness that Sophia found, in that moment, the most revealing thing she had ever heard from him. No hesitation. No wait. The voice of a man for whom this outcome was not a failure but a resolution. He walked out. The residents followed. They always followed. Sophia did not move. She stood at the side of the table with both hands flat on the rail, looking at Hanol's face, which was still and gray, and arranged in the particular blankness of a man who had stopped negotiating with the world, and she did not reach for the draping and she did not step back and she did not leave. The orderly who came for the body found her there 8 minutes later. He was a young man, kind in the automatic way of people who had not yet been made unkind by the work, and he said, "Ma'am," in a tone that was both gentle and instructional. "Not yet," Sophia said. "Ma'am, the protocol." "Not yet." She wasn't touching Hanol. She wasn't performing anything. She was simply present, in the way that she had learned mattered more than people admitted, the physical fact of someone who refused to agree that a person was already gone. Her pink backpack was still on the chair in the corner where she had left it 6 hours ago. The termination notice was still in the front pocket. She had not, in the chaos of the night, found a moment to feel anything about either of these facts, and she did not find that moment now. She found something else instead. Hanol Jang opened his eyes. Not slowly. Not the cinematic flutter of a man returning from a great distance. His eyes opened the way they had scanned the room on arrival, completely, immediately, with the full deliberate presence of someone who had never actually left. He looked at the ceiling for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked at Sophia. "You stayed," he said. His voice was rough from the intubation, stripped to its foundation, but the authority in it was structural, built into the material, not applied to the surface. Sophia stared at him. Your heart stopped, she said. Yes. For 11 minutes. 9, he corrected, and something moved in his expression that was almost, in a different context, almost, I had a very good cardiologist before yours. There are methods. He paused. The doctor. The one with the white hair. He left. Yes. Before he confirmed I was dead. Yes. Hanol nodded once, slowly, with the satisfied gravity of a man whose hypothesis had been proven. I needed to know who would walk out, he said. And I needed to know who would not. His eyes stayed on her. Now I know both. The hospital board convened at 9 a.m. in the 4th-floor conference room, which had floor-to-ceiling windows and a long table that was designed to communicate the seriousness of the people who sat at it. They had been told the meeting concerned a post-operative incident review. They had not been told that the patient would be attending. Hanol Jang walked in under his own power, which was the first thing that recalibrated the room. He was in fresh clothing his bodyguard had sourced, dark trousers, a simple black shirt, a bandage visible at his collar. He moved carefully, conserving energy with the discipline of someone who understood the difference between strength and the performance of it. He sat at the head of the table, which no one had invited him to do and no one moved to correct. Graves was already seated, flanked by his department head and the risk management officer. He had prepared. Sophia could see the folder in front of him, the printed documentation, the architecture of a man who had spent the early morning hours building the version of last night that he needed the board to believe. Sophia sat against the wall. She had not been given a seat at the table. She had brought a chair. Hanol looked at Graves for a long moment without speaking. The silence was not uncomfortable for Hanol. It was clearly very uncomfortable for everyone else. You left the OR, Hanol said finally. Before you confirmed I was dead. You left a patient on the table and you walked out. Graves opened his folder. The time of death had been. You left, Hanol repeated, with the patient emphasis of a man who was not interested in the folder. And before you left, you attempted to administer a medication that would have killed me faster and more quietly than the bullet did. The board member at the far end of the table, a woman in her 60s with the bearing of someone who had heard many things and been surprised by very few of them, looked up from her notes. Graves' folder stayed open but his hands had stopped moving. The nurse, Hanol said, and he did not turn to look at Sophia because he didn't need to, flagged your patient's allergy at intake. She removed the contraindicated medication from the tray. She remained with me after your senior physician declared me dead and walked away. A pause. She is the only person in this building who did their job completely and without self-interest, and she came here this morning carrying a termination notice with your signature on it. He reached into his jacket and placed the folded envelope on the table. Sophia had not seen him take it from her bag. She found, remarkably, that she did not mind. Hanol stood. He turned to face her fully, in front of the board, in front of the risk management officer, in front of Graves and his folder and his carefully prepared version of the night. He raised his right hand to his brow. The salute was slow. Deliberate. A thing constructed in full view of everyone in the room, so that no one could later claim they had not seen it, or had not understood what it meant. This woman, Hanol said, to the room and to the record, saved my life twice. Once with her hands, and once by refusing to leave. He lowered his hand. He looked at the board member at the far end. The physician's privileges, he said, should be reviewed. Today. He looked at Graves. I won't be filing a formal complaint, Hanol said quietly. You understand why. Graves understood why. The color left his face in a single, complete departure. By noon, the offer had been made and the terms were not complicated. The board used the language of restructuring and interim leadership and transitional oversight, which were the words institutions used when they needed to move quickly and maintain the appearance of process. Sophia listened to all of it from her chair against the wall, still in yesterday's scrubs, her pink backpack on her knee. When they were finished, she said she would need to review the contract. Hanol, standing near the window with the city visible behind him, looked at her with an expression that had been building since 11:47 the previous night and had now arrived, fully formed, at something she did not yet have a word for. "Take your time," he said. "I will," she said. "And you need to go back to your room. You have a chest tube that still needs monitoring and you've been vertical for 40 minutes and your pressure is doing something I don't like. You're not my nurse." "Not yet," she said, and stood, and the ghost of a smile that crossed her face was the same one from the night before, brief, real, belonging entirely to her. Hanol Jang, the most feared man in the city, followed her out of the boardroom without being asked twice. Outside the window, the city continued without awareness of what had just shifted inside this building. But inside, in the corridors where Sophia Collins had been invisible for 3 years, in the break room where her silence had been mistaken for smallness, in the OR where someone had tried to make her an ending, something had permanently rearranged. The nurse who had always been the most dangerous person in the room had finally been given a room that knew it.